In a society that celebrates constant noise, quiet can seem like a defiant act. We inhabit a world where vocal expression is frequently linked to power, where the most vocal individuals are presumed to have the most significant insights. Social media platforms provide everyone with a voice, and too often we mistake having a voice for the necessity to use it incessantly. But what if genuine strength, real, unyielding strength, is discovered not in speaking, but in opting to remain silent? Choosing silence requires courage, self-discipline, confidence, and purpose, because silence, when it is a choice rather than an imposition, is an act of power. It conveys to the world that you don't need to justify yourself to be at peace, that your self-worth isn't dependent on others' opinions. It's not indifference or evasion, it's wisdom. The wisest individuals in any gathering are often the quietest because they grasp something most of us overlook in our haste to be heard. Speaking is simple, but listening is challenging. Reacting is easy, but responding with clarity demands discipline. Silence provides the space to reflect, to comprehend before replying, to connect with ourselves before disengaging from others. However, silence isn't solely about restraint, it's also about strategy. Picture yourself in a meeting surrounded by assertive personalities, individuals quick to debate and even quicker to defend their views. You sit quietly, observing. You're not intimidated, you're focused, reading the room, picking up on the unspoken words, and paying attention to the tone and energy. When you finally speak, your words hold weight not because you raised your voice, but because you waited for the right moment. That's not weakness, that's wisdom in action. It's human nature to want to defend ourselves, especially when misunderstood or criticized. The instinct to shout back, to prove a point, to reclaim dignity is strong. But what if you already possess dignity, and nothing anyone said could take that away? What if you didn't need to prove anything because you already knew who you were? That's what silence offers. It anchors you in your identity and disconnects your self-worth from public opinion. Consider the leaders you admire most. They don't panic during crises, overreact to criticism, or blurt out answers. They pause, breathe, process, and then speak with clarity. That pause, that silence, is the difference between reacting to survive and responding to lead. Silence teaches patience, reminding us that not everything requires an immediate answer. Sometimes the wisest action is to step back, not because you don't care, but because you care enough to get it right. There's humility in that, a humility that says, I don't need to be the first to speak. I want to be the one who adds the most value when I do. Ironically, when you choose silence with purpose, people start to listen more intently when you do speak. You become known not for how often you speak, but for how meaningful your words are. And that changes the dynamic, because influence isn't about volume, it's about impact. We often perceive silence as a void, but it's not. It's a container, a space where thoughts form, emotions settle, and clarity emerges. Silence is where we access our inner wisdom, the voice inside us that isn't fighting to be heard, but simply wants to be understood. The more comfortable we become with that silence, the more we can lead ourselves and others from a place of calm confidence. Let's be honest, it's not easy. Silence can feel unnatural at times, making us feel small, irrelevant, or left behind in a fast-moving, loud world. But here's the paradox. The more we practice intentional silence, the more grounded we become. That grounding allows us to move through life with more intention, empathy, and resilience. We've all had moments where we said something we regretted, not because we didn't mean it, but because we didn't take the time to understand what we truly meant. In those moments, silence could have been our ally, buying us space to cool the fire instead of fueling it, helping us turn a confrontation into a conversation. There's a reason why some of the most impactful moments in life are marked by silence. The hush before a powerful speech, the stillness after a profound realization, the quiet between two people who don't need words to understand each other. Silence isn't empty, it's full of meaning if we're willing to listen. So, what does it mean to be silent and act as if nothing bothers you? It doesn't mean you don't feel or that you suppress your truth or deny your pain. It means you choose when and how to express it. It means you don't hand over control of your emotions to every passing opinion or criticism. It means you reserve your energy for the moments that matter and act with grace in the moments that don't. You don't need to shout to prove you're strong or react to show that you care. Sometimes the boldest thing you can do is stay silent, stay grounded, and keep moving. In the end, people will remember not how loudly you spoke, but how deeply you made them think, and more often than not, that starts with silence. There's something incredibly powerful about being the calmest person in the room. Not the most charismatic, not the loudest, not even the smartest, but the one who can hold their composure when everything else is falling apart. That kind of presence doesn't come from pretending. It comes from understanding, from mastering the one thing we carry with us in every situation: our emotions. We don't get to control what happens to us. Life throws things at us that we don't expect, can't predict, and sometimes don't deserve. People misunderstand us, challenge us, provoke us, and our first instinct is often to react, to defend, to strike back, to prove something. But the problem with reacting is that it hands over the steering wheel. It gives the moment control over us rather than the other way around. Emotional reactivity is like a match in a dry forest. One spark and everything burns. It might feel good for a second, that instant release, that "I told you so," that feeling of power. But it's fleeting because after the smoke clears, we're left with consequences: burned bridges, broken trust, damaged relationships. We're left cleaning up a mess we didn't take the time to prevent. Contrast that with emotional mastery. Mastery doesn't mean you don't feel the heat. It means you've trained yourself not to let the heat make your decisions for you. It means that when your pulse quickens and your mind wants to race ahead, you know how to slow it down. You pause, you breathe, you create space between what you feel and how you choose to act. And in that space lies power. In that space, you're no longer a victim of the moment, you're the author of your response. Emotional mastery isn't something you fake. It's not about suppressing your emotions or pretending things don't get to you. It's about understanding your emotions so well that they stop being drivers and start becoming indicators. They stop running the show and start informing it. You feel anger, but you ask why. You feel hurt, but you search for what it's pointing to. And from that awareness, you lead, not from emotion, but through it. Think about the best leaders you've ever known, not just titles, but real leaders, the ones who made you feel safe, seen, and inspired. I'll bet they weren't the ones who lost their temper or panicked when things got hard. They were probably the ones who stayed steady, who listened first, who asked thoughtful questions instead of reacting to assumptions, who gave people the benefit of the doubt. That's not just leadership, that's emotional mastery in action. We tend to admire people who keep their cool, but we rarely talk about how hard that actually is. It takes discipline, self-awareness, and practice. You don't become emotionally intelligent overnight. You grow into it by failing, by regretting, by reflecting afterward and asking yourself, what could have I done differently? And if you're willing to be honest in that process, you grow stronger every time. Emotional mastery means learning to pause, not just for yourself, but for others. Because when someone else is being reactive, when they are projecting or panicking or even attacking you, it's easy to mirror that energy. But a leader knows that mirrors aren't always helpful. Sometimes you have to be a window. You have to help them see through their storm and into a place of calm. And you can only do that if you've already found that place in yourself. This isn't about being passive, it's about being intentional. It's about choosing to respond in a way that serves the moment instead of surrendering to it. Sometimes the strongest thing you can say is nothing. Sometimes the most powerful move is not to react, but to wait, to let the dust settle, to give space for truth to rise. Because not every argument needs a comeback, not every insult needs a defense. Some moments just need a little silence and a lot of grace. Emotional reactivity says, I need to win this moment. Emotional mastery says, I'd rather win in the long run. Reactivity is short-term thinking. It prioritizes the ego. Mastery is long-term leadership. It prioritizes the mission. And the mission, whatever it is, whether it's building a company, raising a family, growing a relationship, or just becoming a better human, will always benefit more from someone who can respond with clarity than someone who reacts with emotion. But here's the most human part of this. We all mess it up. No one gets it right all the time. Emotional mastery doesn't mean perfection. It means you care enough to reflect that the next time you get it a little more right than the last. It means apologizing when you lose your cool, not because it's expected, but because it aligns with who you want to be. Growth is messy, but it's worth it. The truth is, the world needs fewer people who react and more people who reflect, fewer people who respond out of fear and more who respond from purpose, fewer emotional outbursts and more emotional intelligence.
And that begins with you, not in some future version of yourself, but in the next moment you feel that urge to explode, to defend, to prove. What will you do then? You could raise your voice, or you could raise your standard. You could react to the noise, or you could return to your values. You could let emotion drive you off course, or you could let it guide you deeper into understanding. That's the choice emotional mastery gives you. And that choice, made consistently over time, builds trust, credibility, and character. Because when people know that you won't be shaken by every storm, they begin to trust you with bigger things, more responsibility, more people, more vision. And that trust, that's how leaders are made. We all get frustrated. It's part of being human. That feeling of being overlooked, misunderstood, underappreciated, or underestimated can boil inside us. Sometimes we want to scream, to vent, to make it clear that we're not okay with how things are going. And yet, in those very moments, we're presented with a choice. We can either spend our energy proving our frustration, or we can spend it proving our point. One burns quickly, the other builds something that lasts. The most impactful people I know, the people who actually move things forward, don't let frustration define their voice. They let their work do the talking. They don't spend their time broadcasting how wrong they've been. Instead, they quietly build, show up consistently, and over time, their actions cut through the noise far louder than any outburst ever could. Frustration is often just energy without direction, and energy without direction creates chaos. But when we channel that energy, when we take that inner fire and use it to fuel our actions, we gain something far more powerful than temporary relief. We gain respect, clarity, and momentum. It's tempting to believe that if we don't express our frustration outwardly, people won't understand how deeply we care. But here's the truth. People remember how we act far more than how we feel. They remember how we showed up when things weren't going our way, whether we stayed the course or cracked under pressure, whether we made the room better or tenser, whether we made it about the mission or about ourselves. You can tell someone 100 times that you're committed, or you can show up on your worst day with the same focus you had on your best, and they'll know. You can insist you're ready for the next opportunity, or you can quietly over-deliver again and again and let your consistency do the convincing. You can voice every disappointment, or you can let your resilience speak for you. People don't follow frustration, they follow purpose. And purpose, when embodied, is louder than any complaint. When others are shouting about what's wrong, the person who just keeps working toward what's right becomes the leader, even if they never say a word about it. Leadership isn't about having the mic, it's about having the mindset. And in a room full of noise, the most focused person always stands out. It's important to acknowledge that frustration is valid. It's a signal that something isn't right. But it's not a solution, it's a cue to pay attention, not a cue to lose control. The difference between frustration that fuels growth and frustration that breeds resentment is how we respond to it. Do we let it paralyze us, or do we let it propel us? Think of the people who built something from nothing: the entrepreneurs, the artists, the educators, the innovators. Most of them started with a reason to be frustrated. They saw a gap, a problem, an injustice. But instead of just talking about how broken the system was, they got to work. They created, they contributed, they became the change they once complained about. And make no mistake, those people weren't any less angry or hurt than anyone else. But they made a decision to let their impact speak louder than their irritation, to let their execution replace their excuses. That's how they gained influence, not through noise, but through results. In any team, any organization, any relationship, frustration is inevitable. But how we handle it becomes a defining trait of who we are. When we default to complaining, we train people to associate us with negativity. But when we channel that frustration into focused action, people start to see us as solution-oriented, grounded, and trustworthy. And trust is the currency of every relationship. There's something deeply inspiring about watching someone who's clearly been tested, who's gone through setbacks and disappointments, yet continues to show up with quiet determination. They don't wear their wounds as armor, they wear their discipline as a signal. They let their habits speak, their progress speak, their values speak without needing to say a thing. They create an atmosphere of excellence. You don't have to prove how much you've endured. Let the life you're building be proof. Let the decisions you make in silence speak volumes. Let the energy you once spent venting be redirected into mastering your craft, leading with empathy, serving with purpose. The irony is that when you stop focusing on being seen or heard, you often end up standing out even more. Because most people spend their energy trying to be noticed, you spend it trying to be valuable. And value doesn't need to shout, it simply shows up over and over again, and over time, it becomes undeniable. If you're in a season right now where you feel like you're being overlooked or underestimated, here's the truth. That's not the enemy. That's an opportunity to become the kind of person who can thrive without applause. Because when you can do that, you become unstoppable. You're no longer dependent on validation to move forward. Your motivation isn't fragile, it's rooted. Let your execution be your voice. Let the excellence in your effort speak for you. People will doubt your intentions. They'll misread your silence. They may even mistake your calm for indifference. But that's okay, because in time, your results will clarify everything. Time always reveals what talk can only suggest. We all want to feel seen. We all want to feel heard. But never forget, being seen starts with becoming worth seeing. Being heard starts with saying something worth listening to. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing. Just act, just do, just build. Because eventually, even the people who doubted you, who dismissed your silence, who overlooked your effort, they'll look around and realize that while they were complaining, you were creating. While they were reacting, you were rising. And while they were talking, you were doing. And that difference, that quiet, steady difference, is what leaves a legacy.
In a world addicted to exposure, mystery has become a superpower. We've been conditioned to believe that if we don't share every thought, every move, every emotion, then we're hiding something. And maybe we are, but not in the way people think. Sometimes we're not hiding weakness, we're protecting strength. We're choosing to keep our power close, not because we're afraid, but because we understand that true leverage comes from what's unseen, not what's advertised. When you reveal everything, your plans, your frustrations, your doubts, you hand over a playbook. You give people access to your emotional landscape, and not everyone will handle it with care. Some will use it, not always maliciously, but sometimes carelessly. And so, there's wisdom in discretion, clarity in restraint. You don't need to play every card to win the game. In fact, the more unpredictable you are, the more control you have, because unpredictability, when rooted in purpose, creates curiosity. It commands attention without demanding it. That doesn't mean you become closed off or manipulative, it means you become intentional. You choose what to share and when. You don't broadcast every feeling you experience because you've come to understand that not every emotion is meant for the stage. Some things are meant to be processed, refined, and expressed only when the time is right, if at all. Think about the strongest people you know, the ones who walk into a room and seem to carry gravity with them.
They're not always the loudest. Often, they're the ones who speak the least but carry the most presence. Why? Because they've mastered the art of composure. They don't give away their emotional state freely. You can't tell if they're rattled or calm, and that mystery makes them powerful. It's not that they don't feel, it's that they've chosen not to be ruled by those feelings. That's leverage. People are watching you more than they're listening to you. They study how you react, looking for signs, facial expressions, body language, tone. Every time you flinch or overreact or spill your anxiety into the room, you communicate more than your words ever could. And here's the key. When you're always showing your hand, people learn how to manage you. They learn your triggers, your insecurities, your limits. And over time, that makes you predictable. But when you stay centered, when you manage yourself first, others can't control you. And that, again, is leverage. This isn't about being fake, it's about being rooted. You don't need to suppress your emotions, but you do need to own them, to filter them, to decide which ones serve the moment and which ones are better kept inside for now. It's the discipline of self-regulation, not because you don't trust others, but because you've earned the right to trust yourself first. When you keep your cards close, you invite people to lean in. There's something magnetic about someone who doesn't reveal everything. It draws people in, makes them wonder. And in that wondering, they begin to listen more carefully, observe more closely. That gives you space to think, space to move, space to lead from strategy, not from reaction. We often confuse openness with authenticity, but authenticity isn't about saying everything you feel, it's about meaning everything you say. It's about alignment. Honesty doesn't require full expression, it requires full integrity. You can be honest and still be selective. You can be real and still be reserved. And in fact, the most effective leaders are both. Not showing your hand doesn't mean you're passive, it means you're purposeful. You don't react just because you can, you respond when it serves. And when it doesn't, you stay still. You observe, you gather information, you watch the field, not to manipulate, but to understand. You play the long game because you know that in life, as in chess, the person who moves first doesn't always win. It's the person who understands the board better. There will be moments when people try to pull you out of that stillness. They'll poke, provoke, try to test your limits. And it will be tempting to show them you're not someone to mess with. But your strength isn't proven in outbursts, it's proven in restraint. When you remain calm in the face of chaos, people start to question their own assumptions. They expected fire, you gave them stone. That's when the power dynamic shifts, not because you overpowered them, but because you refused to be shaken. You can't control how others act, but you can control how you choose to respond. And in that choice lies your leverage. Because when you're no longer reacting emotionally to every comment, every look, every moment, you free yourself. You create space between stimulus and response. And in that space, you can lead with wisdom instead of impulse. And we're not taught this. We're taught to be expressive, to be transparent, to put our feelings on display in the name of being real. But real doesn't mean reactive. It means intentional. It means knowing what's worth responding to and what's worth letting pass. There's dignity in silence, confidence in mystery, power in patience, and leverage in being the person who doesn't need to explain themselves all the time. Because when people can't read you, they start to respect you. When you stop performing for attention, you begin to attract it. And when you carry yourself with quiet confidence, you become someone others look to, not because you shouted, but because you didn't need to. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more people who can move with calm certainty, who don't panic under pressure, who don't give everything away, who understand that power isn't in telling people everything you know. It's in knowing when to say nothing at all. So the next time you feel that urge to show your hand, to tell them how upset you are, to react out of emotion, to prove your point, pause, breathe, and ask yourself, will this make me more effective? Will it bring me closer to my goals or just closer to their level? And if the answer doesn't serve your mission,
Keep your power, keep your composure, keep your leverage. Because the quietest one in the room isn't weak. They're simply the one who knows they don't have to reveal everything to prove they've already won.
We often confuse silence with surrender. We've been taught that if you're not speaking up, if you're not asserting yourself, if you're not fighting back, then you're losing. But that's not always true. In fact, silence can be one of the most strategic, most powerful tools we have when it comes from a place of strength, not fear. Silence, when chosen, isn't weakness, it's wisdom. There's a reason we remember the people who stay calm when others panic, why we lean in a little more when someone speaks less but listens more. It's because silence carries something words often can't: presence. You can speak volumes by saying nothing if your silence comes from intention, if it's rooted in awareness. Silence is not about absence, it's about self-control. And in today's world, that kind of control is rare, and rare things are valuable. There's this myth that to be strong, you must always be loud, always be visible, always be in the center of the conversation. But real strength is knowing when not to enter the conversation at all, when to observe, when to allow others to speak their truth without feeling the need to correct, contradict, or compete. Leaders aren't made by dominating conversations. They're made by discerning when their voice will add clarity and when their silence will create space. You don't have to respond to everything. In fact, maturity is learning which moments deserve your energy and which don't. The need to always speak comes from ego, the desire to prove you know, to prove you're not weak, to prove you belong. But when you already know who you are, you stop needing to prove it to everyone else. You're not afraid of silence because you've made peace with yourself in it, and that's where wisdom begins. In the quiet moments, the reflective spaces where you're not performing, not reacting, not defending, but simply present. You learn more in silence than you do in chaos. You grow more in reflection than you do in resistance. The quiet mind sees clearly, and clarity is one of the greatest leadership traits there is. Some of the most damaging decisions are made in haste when people feel the pressure to speak up, to respond, to act immediately. Silence gives you time. It slows the pace, allows emotion to settle so logic can step forward. It doesn't delay action, it improves it. Silence gives you perspective enough to realize that not every insult needs an answer, not every accusation deserves a defense, and not every opportunity requires your voice. Sometimes the smartest move is to say nothing and observe everything. There's also a deeper kind of silence, the one that shows up when people try to provoke you, when someone expects you to react and you don't. It disarms them because they were counting on your outburst, your defensiveness. Your silence takes away their power. It tells them without a word that you're not here to be controlled by someone else's chaos. You're here to lead yourself first. Silence also protects your dignity in moments of conflict. The loudest person rarely wins. It's the person who stays grounded, centered, and thoughtful, who walks away with respect. Because anyone can shout, anyone can react, but it takes strength to stay composed when your emotions are running high. That's not passive, that's purposeful. It's not weakness, it's leadership. This doesn't mean you never speak up. It doesn't mean you suppress your voice. Quite the opposite. It means you protect your voice so that when you do use it, it matters. So that when you do speak, people listen. Not because you're loud, but because you're known for speaking only when it counts. Silence creates contrast, and contrast creates impact. The leaders who inspire the most aren't just the ones who say brilliant things, they're the ones who know when to say them. Timing matters, delivery matters, and silence, when used wisely, enhances both. It's like the rest between the notes in a song. It's what gives the melody its shape. Without silence, without pause, without restraint, everything blends into noise. And leadership is not built in noise. It's built in presence, the ability to be fully in the moment without needing to dominate it. The power of being still while everything else moves around you. It's why the calmest person in the room is often the one others look to for guidance, even if they haven't said a word. There's trust in stillness, security in silence, wisdom in restraint. We live in a world that tells us to always have an opinion, to always have an answer, to always be ready to argue our side. But silence teaches us something different. It teaches us to listen first, to observe the layers beneath the surface, to read the room, not just respond to it.
And in that pause, we often find the truth we would have missed had we rushed to speak. Silence also creates space for others. When you're not trying to fill every silence with your own voice, you make room for others to step up, to share, to lead. That's leadership too, not needing to be the center, but creating a center that includes others. Silence can be inclusive, it can be powerful, and it can be a gift you give to the people around you so they feel heard, not overshadowed. At the end of the day, silence is a form of confidence. When you know what you stand for, you don't have to shout it. When you know where you're going, you don't have to explain every step. When you trust your own inner compass, you stop seeking validation from outside voices. And when you carry that kind of quiet certainty, people notice. They don't just hear your silence, they respect it. So the next time you feel the pressure to speak, ask yourself, is this about being right or about being wise? Is this about control or about clarity? Is this moment calling for your voice or your presence? Because wisdom isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the space between the noise that carries the greatest truth. And in that space, in that silence, you may just find the strength, the strategy, and the serenity you didn't even know you needed.